Hey kids, it's Mr. Thompson. I'm out here in my garage with my dogs. So, gonna go over some woodworking equipment. I've moved my woodworking equipment out to my garage. It was in my basement. But dog right there, the fat red-headed one, chewed the cords off some of my stuff, so I had to move it. So, upstairs in my garage attic, which is a mess, but it does have a lot of the equipment we're using. So we're gonna head up there now. Around, see what we got here. All right, so got a pile of tubes there. I got my dust collector. Got my miter box saw. I got my stationary disc and belt sander. I got my bandsaw. Got my surface planer. I got my scroll saw. And this nasty old thing over here is my table saw, which probably came from an auction. And you see what else I have on my table saw? It's a new plug. Why? Because this is what my dog likes to do. So that's why they're all up here. This is going to be my new workshop, which is freezing cold. So this thing here is a dust collector. And you may remember, if you've had me already, that we turn the dust collector on anytime we're using equipment that is hooked up to it. So I have all these tubes. I have another dust collector right here. This is a little bit nicer one. I don't have this all set up yet, but I'm getting ready to hook my vacuum up for my miter box saw. And I got a vent set up here where I'm going to hook a vacuum up for my disc and belt sander. And then on my bandsaw, this is actually the back of the bandsaw, I'm going to hook a tube here and hook the dust collector up to that. Now, woodworking students, you're going to use a miter box saw. You're going to use a table saw. Not this one, though. One that's much nicer with a guard on it. And you're going to use the bandsaw to cut your pieces to finish sizes. Now, the miter box saw right here, we're going to use this to cross-cut, cut against the grain. So we're taking a long board, we're cutting across it, we're making it shorter. The table saw, we're going to use to rip the board into narrower pieces. Ripping means that we are cutting with the grain of the wood, so the long board stays long. It just becomes narrower. And then our bandsaw, standing up over there, we're going to use that to cut curves. We can also do that on the scroll saw, but the scroll saw, that's for more intricate, tighter curves on thinner stock, where the stock we're using is going to be 3/4 inch thick. The thickness planer, we're going to use that to change the thickness of a board. So while I talk about these different types of equipment that such as the miter box saw, the table saw, the bandsaw, and the planer, we're going to talk about or review, if you've had me already, some different safety margins. Now, you don't want to see me all the time. So if you look at my miter box right there, here's a line, and it shows the hand. Keep your hand away from the line. The miter box saw is going to have a safety margin of 6 inches. So 6 inches is as physically close to the miter box saw that you should get while it's running. That gives you enough time to react should something go bad while you're cross cutting the board. So miter box saw has a safety margin of 6 inches. You'll also know that the miter box saw has this nice guard on it. All of these stationary saws should have guards that are kept in place. That's why I don't like this table saw. It's just that I got it really cheap and it's handy to have it at home. The table saw, it's going to have a safety margin of 4 inches. So you can get a little bit closer, but you can see with my fence is my straight edge cutting guide, that it's definitely closer than 4 inches. So if I was going to rip some narrow stock, I'd want some type of push stick, a push stick to rip the narrow stock to keep my hands safe. So a push stick is used when ripping narrow stock on the table saw. Now the bandsaw, it's a little less destructive. So it's going to have a safety margin of 2 inches. So when you're working on the table of the bandsaw, you can get a little bit closer, have your fingers a little bit closer, and as close as 2 inches and still be safe. A lot of machines are going to have safety rules posted on them. And so if you look in our high school shop, you might see some of the things I just talked about posted there. Now, I said the bandsaw is useful for cutting curves. If you're cutting a really sharp curve on the bandsaw, I have a nice video I'll share with you sometime. It shows me doing relief cuts. Relief cuts are used when cutting sharp curves on the bandsaw. Now, the thickness planer, it's going to have a gauge on the side. So the one we have at the high school shop, it's huge. But there's still going to be a little ruler on the side called the gauge. If you are ripping softwoods, you can set that gauge, the gauge depth, to remove 1/8 of an inch of material on softwoods. If you're planing hardwoods, the maximum amount you can take at a time is 1/16. So when planing stock softwoods, you can take up to 1/8 of an inch, and hardwoods you can take up to 1/16 of an inch. So again, there's my dust collector. Once I get that hooked up, I'm going to want to make sure that that is turned on when using equipment that is hooked up to it. Here's the miter box saw used for cross cutting, cutting against the grain. Here's the table saw, useful for cutting with the grain, which is ripping. And there's the bandsaw back there, useful for cutting curves. Safety margin on the miter box saw is 6 inches. Safety margin on the table saw over there is 4 inches. And the safety margin on the bandsaw is 2 inches. Another thing that I should note about a couple of these is on the bandsaw, the blade. If I was to spin this blade around, there's going to be a weld to make the welded band of steel. If I was cutting with the bandsaw, I would not want to stand over there on the side, because that welded area on the blade creates a weak area and that could shoot out. So never stand on the side of the bandsaw while you're cutting with that. And when you're cutting with the table saw, sometimes the material can get stuck between the fence and the blade. And if that happens, it's going to kick straight back. So it's going to kick straight back. You never want to stand directly behind the blade. You want to be off to the side of the blade on the table saw when cutting or ripping a board. All right, so that's my very, very messy wood shop that I've moved up to my garage attic because I can't keep it in my warm basement anymore. The dogs get in the basement and they chew the cords off of them, and now I have to replace some of the plugs. So I have another one over here. There's another plug. I got to put that on my dust collector, actually. So I'm going to have a Google form on this safety information that I provided for you today. Please fill out that Google form online. You can retake that Google form as many times as you'd like, because I'd like you to have a perfect score on that. And then hopefully when we meet in person, you'll be ready to get going in the wood shop. Have a great day.